Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Once a DJ. If you'd like to support the show, then head to onceadj.com/support to find out how you can help. If you'd like to get in touch with any feedback or suggestions, email onceadjpodcast@gmail.com. Once a DJ is produced by the good people at Remote Control. If you'd like to find out more about working with them, head to remote-ctrl.co.uk. Time for the show. Once a DJ is brought to you with the support of Vinyl Underground Record Store. Since 1993, VU has been shipping new and used underground house, techno, disco, hip-hop, soul and more worldwide from Northampton in the UK. They're your go-to store for upfront releases, repressed classics and deep digging for undiscovered gems. And they're a great crew to deal with who really care about the music and their customers. To show the support to the Once a DJ community, they're giving you 10% off your next order. Just head to vinylunderground.co.uk and use the code ONCEADJ10 at checkout. You also get free UK delivery on all orders over £100. That's ONCEADJ10 at vinylunderground.co.uk. Welcome back to Once a DJ. We're sat here today with a man that's done a lot of different things, Mr. Rob DeBank. How are you doing today, Rob?
I'm very good, Adam. Happy New Year, and how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I'm 5 nights sober, got my chamomile tea, feeling like an absolute champion. So we'll see how long that lasts.
I'm 369 days sober, I think. So I'm a tiny bit ahead of you, but I know the feeling.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I'm sure we'll get into a lot around wellness and that sort of thing. So what I tend to do, and I find a really nice sort of starting point with this, is kind of going down to timeline really, and just exploring your journey through music, where it's taken you, and getting onto the other sort of subsequent opportunities it's brought your way, and kind of where you're at and the projects you're working on now. So it'd be really interesting to just start with, if you could just kind of tell me a bit about where music came into your life and what sort of music.
Yeah, so I grew up in a fairly traditional little village on the south coast, and my dad was a doctor. My mum was a midwife, and we lived a little sort of villagey lifestyle. With my dad had a brass band, so musically, then I started playing the trombone when I was about 7 or 8 probably, and I had piano lessons, and so it was quite a sort of middle class kind of regular upbringing where so I wasn't like I bought a rock and roll record when I was 7 or something. I was very much kind of that was how I started my journey into music. But then quickly, probably by the age of 12 or 13, I was listening to more kind of early pop stuff.
I had that brass band village sort of existence. So my weapon of choice, or weapon of my stepdad's choice, was the cornet. Did you enjoy it? Because for me, I found it kind of a chore. I would never practice, but years like in the years to come, it would prove very valuable. But at the time, I wasn't really interested.
No, I mean, I think you've totally summed it up. And even now, I've made my kids learn the guitar or the piano, and they sort of kicked and screamed at me for ages. And then now they're all like absolutely love playing the guitar and love DJing, and things that I haven't necessarily pushed them into. But I just think things like learning a language or an instrument, it's like when you get to 30, you're like, well, I'm so glad I did that, because I know so many people that weren't pushed into that, and they just have a lifelong regret of never having picked up that skill. And particularly if you want to have a career in music, then I can't really play instruments, to be honest. If you sat me in front of a piano or a guitar, I could knock something out, but very, very basic. So I don't think you need to be a virtuoso musician to be a DJ or something, and not at all. But it just gives you a really great grounding, and it's a good practice and a good ritual.
Yeah, it just helps you understand how music works, I think, doesn't it, in terms of composition and arrangement and things.
Yeah, and it gives you the whole sort of melody aspect and timing, and because when I did start DJing around 15, 16, then if I hadn't had that musical sort of grounding, I don't think I'd have picked up as quickly as I did, although I'm still learning.
Yeah, I think the nice thing with piano and guitar is that if you've got someone who's young who's got an interest in a certain type of music, with piano and guitar you can effectively play full songs, rather than if you say you were into Michael Jackson or whatever, it's like, yeah, get your trombone and play the melody to Rock With You. It's not as exciting as having like the chord structure and singing along.
No, totally. Yeah. I mean, the trombone has not really featured in my life since I was about 15, but I don't regret having that. And we travelled around Europe. We went to like Twin Towns and played concerts and stuff. So it was a really great grounding in music.
Yeah. So what was the early music then that really grabbed you when you were getting to these sort of early teens?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, when they ask what their first record is, they come out with something uber cool, and maybe they were listening to something uber cool, but I was listening to like Duran Duran, Adam and the Ants, Pet Shop Boys, Tears for Fears, U2, so 80s. I was born in 73, so I was, early 80s was when I started getting into music, and it was my mate's sisters, my sister. We all had sisters that were a couple of years older, and they were all sort of dressed up in their sort of 80s stonewashed jeans and kind of whatever girls wore in the 80s and playing us. Well, they weren't playing us, we were just listening through the bedroom door at like Tears for Fears and Pet Shop Boys and sort of early 80s pop.
I think in village life as well, it's about what you kind of get access to, isn't it? It's something I often discuss with people on here, because it's when you get people that were into something that's kind of counterculture related, it's often that they were close enough to some sort of pirate radio or something like that. But if you're in the back of Beyond, you don't get the exposure, do you?
Well, I mean, you don't know that's even out there. You've got no idea that Joy Division exists, or The Cure, or the Smiths. How would you, unless you're listening to John Peel, which was then the sort of next natural step. But not many sort of 12-year-olds are listening to John Peel. So, I was going down to the local sailing club disco and jigging around to the B-52s or pop stuff. But then my mate Tim, who I grew up with, he started playing me New Order and Joy Division and Durutti Column and much cooler stuff. So I then started going off in that sort of way. Then Manchester happened when I was about 15 or 16, and although we lived I went to school in Portsmouth, and Manchester did hit Portsmouth weirdly. So loads of people started walking around in flares and kind of those Ian Brown type T-shirts, and so there was another thread, and I just couldn't get enough of it. Whatever it was, Stone Roses, Manchester, early rave stuff, guy called Gerald, Orbital, all these things were just flooding in, and it was like, wow, this is just like a total treasure trove. And then, like I say, the John Peel thing. So there was as much as I could buy with my meagre funds from Venus Records in Fareham, but then also there was John Peel on the radio, which I could fall back onto and learn even more.
Do you think so? This kind of being removed from the place where the things are happening, do you think there's a kind of benefit in that you kind of take everything equally? So say if you got into Manchester and you're there, could you have potentially overlooked other things because you're so engulfed in a scene?
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. I think having a paucity of culture around, and I love Southampton and Portsmouth, but they're not the cultural capitals of the UK. And I was so struck with Manchester that I wanted to go to university in Manchester. I wanted to move there immediately. I just was like, that is like Mecca. But I'm glad that I grew up where I did, and I'm glad I grew up in a little village that was kind of starved of that, because it made me all the more hungry for what came later. And, when I did eventually move to London, it was like, bam, like, whereas if I'd grown up in London, being a cool kid, or lived in Manchester and been sort of sucked into that scene, you're right, I might not have explored so widely.
Yeah. So, did you go to university? Is that what took you to London?
Yeah. So as soon as I got out of school, I went to Goldsmiths in South London, and had a total baptism of fire into street culture and music in good and bad ways.
Can you expand on that at all?
Well, I was a white middle class kid from a little village on the south coast, not very streetwise, slightly gothic, slightly kind of slightly Manchester, yeah, and then suddenly dropped into, at the age of 18, my sister drove me up to Deptford in her mini metro, dropped me off at the halls of residence, and I was like, right, okay, I'm in South London, how the hell did this happen? And then I'm walking down the streets. I got mugged like 5 or 6 times in the first few months. I had to stand up in front of the whole halls of residence as an example of someone who, not in a bad way, but they were like, this guy's been mugged so many times. This is what you've got to not do. This is what, and I was just totally un-street cred. I was probably wandering around with £10 note in my hand or something. I didn't have a lot of money, but whatever money I did have was quickly stolen off me. I made friends with the crack dealer Mickey, who mugged me numerous times with his Rottweiler. I mean, I got taken to a Wimpy by him at gunpoint, made to buy him a Wimpy. It was actually quite a sort of, looking back on it, I never told my mum and dad. I told some sort of friends, but I was driven around in unmarked police cars trying to identify gang members. It sounds like I'm making it up, and I'm actually thinking about it now, how insane it was. But I ended up becoming mates with the crack dealer who sat on the streets of Deptford High Street and sort of befriended me. And once he'd befriended me, then everyone left me alone. So suddenly I was like, I wasn't part of the gang at all, but they've rinsed that kid out, let him go now. I got a bit more streetwise. I remember walking down to the end of Deptford High Street, buying the Ragged Twins debut album on Shut Up and Dance, and just be like, so all of this stuff had happened, but it hadn't tainted my total excitement at being at Goldsmiths Uni, being 18 years old, being surrounded by art students. And that's where I met Josie as well, in the first term of the first year there, and she was in the same hall. So
yeah, that's a lot to go through, because I remember, so I went to Derby for university. I had a choice of Salford or Derby, and Salford was rough Salford at the time, and being a little country kid, I was like, I don't want to go somewhere dead rough where, yeah, I'm probably going to get mugged all the time. If I'd have done it, I would have gone on a far better course. I hope the University of Derby doesn't mind me saying that. But I remember even just living in a small city, I would just wander down the street, and anyone that walked past, I'd go, all right. Because that's what you do in a village. You're just so friendly to everyone, and then people just look at you just like, why is this guy talking to me and stuff? It is just very different. So I'm sure I would have had a similar thing if I'd have gone there.
My son's just moved to London, which I wasn't having any sort of flashbacks of my. He's living in a nicer area, and by the way, I loved Deptford and New Cross, and it gave me a really great upbringing. But yeah, when my son moved, I had to brief him. He's grown up on the Isle of Wight, and we live in the country, and I was like, look, Arlo, when you get to London, you might feel tempted to just nod and wave and smile at people and say hello. That's totally cool, but just, don't be surprised when you just get completely blank stares and some odd looks, because that's what, London and probably some other cities, they just do that to you, don't they? You smile at someone on the tube, they'll probably phone the police and say you were harassing them or or punch you in the face. So it's it's kind of hard, isn't it, when you're so full of beans, and then it gets kind of a bit knocked out of you. But then I embrace London in all its other beautiful ways.
Yeah. So what did you go to study?
Well, I'd love to say that I was doing fine art or something like that. I mean, Damien Hirst had just left there, or he was still there, and it was very much that young British artists, scene. So all the Damien Hirst, Tracy Emin, all those guys were just sort of knocking around there. But I actually did French and history of art, so the only thing I was any good at school was French. So I was turning 18. I was like, right, I need to get out of the village. I need to go and spread my wings. What can I do? So I was like, right, I'll just do French. And where's a cool place? I can't get into Manchester. The grades are too high, so I can't follow my Manchester dream. I ended up at Goldsmiths.
So musically then, had you got any intentions to DJ at this point?
Well, I was already DJing as a sort of hobby. So I started DJing when I was about 16, saved up, bought some Technics, one of which I've still got. One, I'd love to know where it is, but someone stole it somewhere. So bought my beloved Technics, and me and my mate Tim, we both learnt to DJ over Sunday afternoons. And so, it was obviously only vinyl at the time, and cassettes, but you couldn't really DJ with those unless you were Greg Wilson or someone.
I was going to say then, speaking of like a Greg Wilson, who was he one of your big influences with DJing?
No, and I don't mean that in a bad way, because I love Greg, but I didn't discover Greg till a lot longer after that. I mean, I'm 16. I was 16 in 1989, so. There's things like The Word or The Tube on TV, and there's John Peel on the radio, but I wasn't even that conscious of DJ culture. I didn't even really know. I obviously knew there were DJs, and I must have been watching someone to have picked up how to learn to DJ. I'm not even sure what that was. It must have been something I was watching on TV, or there wasn't any YouTube or anything, so I'm not even sure how that happened. But I just picked it up, and I was playing like funk and soul and hip hop and early kind of house and techno. So anything from Maceo and the Max and James Brown through to Orbital and the Orb, and more kind of chill outy kind of early electronica stuff. So that was how I was sort of learning to DJ, mixing up a lot of styles, which is probably my trademark sort of style of just mashing it all up. So that's probably where that came from, having to just do with what the records that I could afford, K-class kind of early sort of cheesy house on the one hand, and then probably like Smith's remixes, Francois Kevorkian Smith's remixes and stuff, and everything in between, really.
Yeah. So was the intention, or part of the intention when you got to London, to really sort of immerse yourself in DJing?
No, it wasn't actually. I still did. I had this kind of. I went to, the school I went to, the careers advisor, I think they gave up on me, but I sort of got it in my head I was going to be a journalist, and so that was really the first thing I did when I was in London. I was a music journalist for a long time. A really long time, like 7 or 8 years, and so DJing was always a kind of hobby. I'd started DJing at Winchester School of Art, where a lot of my friends were, so I was DJing at the Union there. I think I DJed at Goldsmiths a little bit, but then it wasn't probably until I set up Sunday Best in the early 90s, when I was 17 or 18. No, was I 17 or 18? Yeah, maybe even 20. And that's when things started to solidify more as a DJ. But it was a long time until I sort of thought of myself as a DJ. I worked at the Music magazine. I worked at Wall of Sound just when it was setting up as a label. And then I was DJing and working in a bar and stuff, and everything was coexisting. So I had 2 or 3 different things going on. And then eventually, years later, probably not until I was 30, my manager then sort of said, I think you should just do the DJing thing.
Once a DJ is brought to you with the support of Vinyl Underground Record Store. Since 1993, VU has been shipping new and used underground house, techno, disco, hip-hop, soul and more worldwide from Northampton in the UK. They're your go-to store for upfront releases, repressed classics and deep digging for undiscovered gems. And they're a great crew to deal with who really care about the music and their customers. To show the support to the Once a DJ community, they're giving you 10% off your next order. Just head to vinylunderground.co.uk and use the code ONCEADJ10 at checkout. You also get free UK delivery on all orders over £100. That's ONCEADJ10 at vinylunderground.co.uk. I wanted to create a product for the listeners to be able to support the show and for the guests as a token of gratitude for being on, so I've teamed up with Sure Shot Shop to create some Once a DJ 45 RPM adapter clamps. These are my weapon of choice as a 45 adapter as they add stability and grip to aid you in any setup. These are available for £25 each plus flat fee postage from onceadj.bigcartel.com, and if you'd like to see the other models you can buy and also customise, check out sureshotshop.com. So can you explain a little bit about the magazine work, how you got into it, the sort of experiences that you had and any highlights?
Yeah, I mean, it was really exciting. One of the best things I ever did. So I think my timeline is so skewed in my head, but I think it was, I got out of uni. The first thing I got was this job at Wall of Sound, the record label. So Mark Jones and Wall of Sound had just set up in Wandsworth. I was obviously massively into record labels, Wall of Sound, Big Beat, that whole skint thing was happening. Fatboy Slim had just started. It was like the Wise Guys and Mekon and Derek DeLarge, and this sort of whole Big Beat thing was just sort of was just coming about. And so I got a job in this dusty old warehouse stamping 7 inches for Mark Jones, and then shortly after that I think I applied to be work experience at a music magazine called Music, MUZIK, which any train spotters from back in the day from the 90s and 2000s will know and love. So it's kind of like a rival to Mix Mag and DJ Magazine, when magazines were the place that you went for your information. That you didn't really there was no internet and the radio stations were sort of sparse, so you saved up and you got your music magazine or your Mix Mag, and that's where you learnt about all the new records. So I started there as kind of work experience, and then through the next 7 years I became like the picture editor, so I chose the photos for the magazine. Then I became the clubs editor, then I became the assistant editor, and so I sort of moved my way up through the ranks doing different roles. But yeah, it was absolutely incredible. Probably the first trip I got sent on was Basement Jaxx in New York. So Basement Jaxx were just kind of kicking off, and I was totally crapping myself because I was a young staff writer, and I hadn't really earned my spurs as a writer. And I was on a Virgin flight to New York with Simon and Felix from Basement Jaxx and PR people, and you're staying in cool hotels and taken around in limos, and Basement Jaxx were DJing with like DJ Sneak at some cool club called Twilo or something like that. And so it was absolutely ridiculously exciting, and that was quite a few years of that, with being the clubs editor and living in Ibiza for a while. And so it was quite a pacey lifestyle.
So was this in relation to Sunday Best then? Did Sunday Best start afterwards?
Well, that started in 91. So all of these things kind of happened at the same time. So I was doing the music magazine, journalism. I started Sunday Best. The label started a couple of years after that. But the club, quickly became very well known for this kind of laid back kind of bar scene, which now sounds daft, but back then bar culture didn't exist. It was like there were pubs and there were clubs, and the clubs were mostly playing trance or techno, never played any kind of left field sort of wonky Mr. Scruff, Greg Wilson style stuff that maybe they did up north, but they didn't in London. So we kind of helped invent that whole bar culture where you could kind of sit there and have a game of chess or backgammon or read a paper and listen to great music played by. And if I think back now, it's crazy that the resident DJs were me, Andy Weatherall, and Harvey. It's like, it was pretty amazing to have those sort of residents, and people, DJs loved coming down there because they could play anything and get away with playing anything, which, like I say, at the time, well, now just sounds what you're talking about, but back then you were a techno DJ or you were a house DJ or you were a funk DJ, but Sunday Best kind of just broke down all those barriers and said, well, just play whatever you want and people will dance.
Yeah, I think that the more people I speak to doing this podcast, particularly sort of around sort of house DJs or people that in my mind are house DJs or sort of more dance leaning, there's not really many DJs that are just one format, one genre. So it must have been really nice at that time to be able to do that. With Harvey and Andy then, did you meet them through booking them or did you know them prior?
That's a really good question, which I will probably never know the answer. I'm not quite. I think probably through working at Music Magazine, then that was such an amazing platform for me, and I wasn't some kind of, what's the word when you're climbing the ladder and you're trying to, you're desperately trying to get all the contacts. It sort of happened organically. I was not that sort of person that was hanging around near the DJ booth trying to get someone's attention. It was just from what I did, and it was quite a small world. Then you met all those DJs. You were hanging out with Richie Houghton and Sven Vath one weekend, and Basement Jaxx, Groove Armada. You were doing, interviewing Fatboy Slim, and all of these guys, remember at that time, were only just starting out, so they weren't like the big mega stars that they are now. So they were all very humble and just starting out on their not little journeys, but on their journeys. So I mean, Harvey was already a legendary DJ. He had his Ministry residency. Weatherall was obviously in his heyday with Sabres of Paradise and all the Clink Street stuff. So yeah, they were both kind of big DJs, but they didn't get treated like that, and they played for, I mean, it was 99p to get in. It was kind of a joke 99p to get in. And DJs, I think we paid Weatherall like 30 quid or something. We never had any money to pay anyone. It was like 200 capacity max. So he probably played for free most of the time.
Yeah, it's nice when people can do things for the love. It's not always easy to do, is it? Because it depends on the rest of your life, the rest of what's going on. But if you can get people together, I'd love to find a way to do something like that myself. But I just don't know how to do it, basically.
I'm not sure it exists anymore, and I don't mean that in a negative way. But I just think that kind of rave culture, sort of bartery sort of system of like, do you want to come and play some records and we'll get you a hot dinner and some beers, it's just not. It probably does in some places, but it's it was definitely a wonderful time of sort of trust.
So by that, do you mean the way that the superstar DJ became a thing, and then DJs as a role became viewed differently?
I mean, yeah, this was it wasn't pre-Superstar. Yeah, it was kind of probably pre-Superstar DJs. I mean, weirdly, I would be sort of on a Sunday with whoever it was, the Herbalizer or Weatherall or Basement Jaxx, down at Sunday Best. And then the next weekend I would be, in my role as clubs editor for music, I'd be at like Cream in Liverpool or Gatecrasher in Sheffield at the height of kind of fluffy handbag house and trance just becoming absolutely huge, which at the time everyone sort of looked down their noses and thought this is cheesy shit. But it was like, to have that, to go to those clubs was just totally bonkers. Thousands and thousands of kids queuing up around the block to get in to see their favourite DJs, and Paul Oakenfold at Cream, and the sort of Seb Fontaine and Tall Paul and all that sort of handbag house and big house sounds. It was very, very exciting. So although I was a kind of cooler journalist DJ, writing about it, I found it, I'm so glad I did that as well, driving up and down the country, visiting all those clubs and seeing what most people in the country were doing, because they weren't all listening to Weatherall and Harvey, for sure.
Yeah, it must have been great to have that sort of broad lens on it.
Well, yeah, also get, so many people think that if you live in the south, then London is the furthest north you're ever going to get. Suddenly I was going to like Preston and Sheffield and Newcastle and Glasgow, and seeing the country, and like I say, seeing if you go down Newcastle High Street on a Saturday night, it's very different to Clapham or Southampton or Plymouth. It's like the culture is just totally different. So yeah, it sort of gave me a much broader view of what was going on in the whole of the UK. Did
you ever come to Derby? Because Derby had quite a rep, I think, in terms of progress and renaissance at one point.
Yeah. So we actually did a thing with Phil Gifford and what was the first club you just said before?
Progress.
Who was the promoter of Progress?
Russell Davison.
Russell Davison, yeah. So I mean, I wrote a lot about Progress. I would have come there a lot. Renaissance and Jeff and those guys, and the Trentham Gardens and all those sort of I spent a lot of time in the Midlands writing about club culture. So that was my whole life for years.
Amazing. When did radio come about then for you?
Well, that was so probably had Sunday Best, early 90s, music magazine, and then probably, I can't actually remember what year it was, but probably mid 90s, late 90s, early 2000s. I think I was 30, but I can't actually remember. But yeah, I was running Sunday Best, and I think that had become really well known nationally as a sort of for this music called chill out, which became, which when it started off was basically ambient and experimental electronic music, and then it became a bit tarnished after too many chill out compilations that kind of, it became a little bit sort of wallpapery, but in its heyday it was what we were kind of playing down there along with other stuff, and Radio 1 had this sort of graveyard shift between 4 and 7 a.m. that they were looking to fill, and so I got a call to do a pilot. My manager said Radio 1 wanted to do a pilot with you. I was like, are you crazy? I've never even been on the radio. I think I'd been on Kiss FM once as a guest, and so then suddenly I was sat there doing a pilot for Radio 1. I thought it'd gone abysmally, and then got an email a few weeks later saying, yeah, well done, you and Chris Coco are going to be presenting a new show called The Blue Room. So they couldn't decide between the two of us, I think, so they gave us both the slot, and I think we did it alternately for quite a long time, and then I sort of went off on my own on Radio 1, and I was there for 12 years, so massively proud part of my career.
What time were you having to get up to do that show then?
Well, this may not come as a shock to many people, but a lot of them were pre-recorded. So if I did do it live, then you'd be getting up at 3:30 in the morning. I wasn't rock and roll enough to be going straight through and then falling into the seat, which I think some DJs were. But I think once a month was the rule. Radio 1 had a kind of rule that anyone from the breakfast show through to midnight had to be live, and then anyone from midnight till 5 or 6 in the morning you could pre-record it. Right. I don't know how it works these days, but yeah. So most of the time I was recording on like a Wednesday afternoon, but it was it's one of my favourite things I've ever done. It was so magical to record a 2-hour, 3-hour show sometimes. For like-minded people, and it was again pre-internet, so this was going out Saturday morning 4 till 7 a.m. It was people kicking out of clubs like Progress, like Gatecrasher, dancing around their cars. It wasn't necessarily all dance music at all. It was quite an eclectic sort of left field show, but yeah, it got a real following. So yeah, it went on for quite a while.
And when I was doing my research, I saw that, apologies by the way if there's big gaps or anything. I think you've just done so much that it's just hard to kind of succinctly get a kind of list of things to go at.
Yeah, there's more gaps in my memory than in your timelines. So it's fine.
I'll send you my notes afterwards. You can remember your life. So I read that when John Peel died, you kind of went in to do the first few shows in his place. I hope I'm not being distasteful in my wording. How was that as an experience? Because that's a big loss, but obviously sort of huge shoes to fill, as it were.
Yeah. No, I mean, I always try and choose my words carefully, because it was such a massive blow to lose John. And I mean, you know, casting my mind back then, you know, as a young radio DJ, music journo, and just music fan, you know, walking into the Clipstone Street Radio 1 building, and you know, John would be sat there with his boxes of vinyl, annotating every single thing, you know, writing down lists and lists of stuff, you know, timing each record, playing at the wrong speed, you know, just he was just this sort of kind of eccentric professor, sort of total music head that everyone was in awe of, because you'd have, you know, Giles Peterson would be sat over there, Fabio and Grooverider would be giggling in the corner, Judge Jules would be there, Marianne Hobbs, you know, later on you'd have Zane Lowe sat there with Annie Mac being his tea lady, kind of giving him a tea. It was totally insane, that room. I can picture it now, you know, it had about 20 or 30 desks in, and you know, just the glitterati, all the best DJs in the world in there, and John was very much, everyone was in reverence to him, you know, he'd always have a t-shirt and a sort of jacket on, and he was quite shy, well, very shy guy, and so he'd walk through the door and, you know, no, he wouldn't really look up, but everyone was like a hushed silence when John walked in the room. So to have this sort of bizarre double-edged sword of sitting in for him was, I mean, it was already pre-planned that I was going to sit in for him while he was away. So, you know, the day that he sadly died, I was actually at Radio 1. I was always made a thing, particularly at Music Magazine, and everything I've always done, I tried to be there early. I think it's a really good start to whatever you're doing, is to be there early, be the first person there and be the last to leave, and that was kind of definitely helped me in my career. And so that day I was super early at Radio 1. I was sat downstairs in that same office, but I was on my own. No one else in, and then Ian Parkinson, one of the controllers of Radio 1, came down and said, Rob, could you please come upstairs with me? I need to talk to you about something. And this was the day on which I was going to be doing my first show with John on holiday in Peru. And Ian sat me down and said, I'm really sorry to have to tell you this, Rob, but John's passed away in Peru. And so it's just like the world sort of fell out from under my feet. And, you know, firstly, as a music fan and John Peel fan, it was just devastating. And then secondly, the kind of realisation that I was supposed to be sort of sitting in on his show, I think that night, pretty sure it was that night. So anyway, yeah, it was, you know, a devastating blow for music worldwide. Actually, at that time then, all the DJs started congregating in Radio 1. You know, the word was getting out and people started coming in, and then everyone went down the pub, the sort of pub down the road where Steve Lamacq and Marianne Hobbs and stuff were holding court and kind of having a bit of a wake, if you will, for John. Luckily, I think Radio 1 made the wise move to, I think that I think that Steve Lamacq maybe it's Steve Lamacq and Joe Wiley, or Steve Lamacq and Marianne Hobbs actually hosted the show that night, maybe for a couple of nights, and then I did actually start, and all I did really was just use the records that John had already pre-planned to be played while he was away, and I just tried to say as little as possible, because, you know, John's fans were hardcore, and, you know, fans from all over the sort of spectrum, but you know, total music heads, and I just didn't want to piss them off or let John's legacy down. So, and I ended up doing that for a few months, and then myself, Hugh Stevens, Ras Kwame, and we got given a new show called One Music, which kind of was supposed to represent you know, John's sort of love of discovering new music, and it sort of moved on to the next chapter. But yeah, it was a crazy few months, because it was literally just sitting there trying to just pay reverence to John, really.
Yeah, it's an unenviable challenge.
Yeah, I can sort of laugh about it now, but not laugh about it, but just I can relax about it now. But at the time, it was. I remember, you know, there were enemy stories. Is Rob da Bank the right person to fill John's shoes? And it was like, oh, I'm not trying to fill his shoes. I'm just being told I'm playing his records for the next couple of months. You know, please, like, just. But yeah, it was. Yeah.
Yeah, like you've not got enough pressure on yourself with that.
Yeah, no, but I can see, you know, it was a huge loss in the radio world, in the music world.
I mean, on the flip side of it, being entrusted to do it, I guess, is a huge honour as well.
Yeah, and I always thought there's no way that John sanctioned this. There's absolutely no way that Radio 1 said to John, yeah, we're going to get Rob da Bank to do it, because there were far cooler DJs in Radio 1 with more underground taste than me. But I suppose Radio 1 were looking at sort of bringing in you know, some younger blood to the station in general. So, and at that time I was young. So yeah, you know, those 12 years at Radio 1, one of the most exciting things I've ever done. And I you know, in true kind of imposter syndrome, I was looking over my shoulder from day one to the day I left, waiting to be told I wasn't needed anymore. So very grateful to wonderful Radio 1.
Once a DJ is brought to you with the support of Vinyl Underground Record Store. Since 1993, VU has been shipping new and used underground house, techno, disco, hip-hop, soul and more worldwide from Northampton in the UK. They're your go-to store for upfront releases, repressed classics and deep digging for undiscovered gems. And they're a great crew to deal with who really care about the music and their customers. To show the support to the Once a DJ community, they're giving you 10% off your next order. Just head to vinylunderground.co.uk and use the code ONCEADJ10 at checkout. You also get free UK delivery on all orders over £100. That's ONCEADJ10 at vinylunderground.co.uk. I wanted to create a product for the listeners to be able to support the show and for the guests as a token of gratitude for being on, so I've teamed up with Sure Shot Shop to create some Once a DJ 45 RPM adapter clamps. These are my weapon of choice as a 45 adapter, as they add stability and grip to aid you in any setup. These are available for £25 each plus flat fee postage from onceadj.bigcartel.com, and if you'd like to see the other models you can buy and also customise, check out sureshotshop.com. So, the next thing I wanted to ask about is Bestival, and kind of what the genesis was, really, because putting on a festival is no mean task. I mean, starting off any sort of new night is work in itself. So putting on a festival is levels above that, you know. Yeah. I mean, it was just a sort of conglomeration of accumulation of kind of quite a few years of putting on parties. So me and Josie had been, you know, putting on Sunday Best. We had the record label going. I was working at music magazines still. I think this was near the time when I was leaving journalism and just doing DJing full time. Josie was running her own really cool bar in East London. You know, we were kind of at this sort of centre of this very cool scene. We were going to Glastonbury a lot, me and Josie, jumping the fence and kind of just loving, you know, just thinking Glastonbury was literally the best thing in the world, which I still think it is. And
And then, me and Josie and a couple of mates sat down in a pub, had too much wine, and decided that we could do it as well, and put on our own festival. And it was the sort of in the festival landscape when there weren't that many festivals around. So you had, Reading and Tribal Gathering, and obviously Glasgow and WOMAD and stuff like that. But there weren't, it was literally the same year that we started. I think Boomtown and Secret Garden started, or it was around that time when these new sort of school of festivals was starting up. So yeah, and it was when Homelands and Creamfields were around as one day festivals. So we kind of had this thing that we'd just put on like a one day, one night festival, and then suddenly it turned into a 3-day show, and we were opening the gates 6 months later, with very little idea what we were doing.
So my only sort of frame of reference for putting on a festival is Wayne's World 2, which probably isn't a huge surprise. Can you kind of describe any of the sort of the level of the sort of ups and downs of planning something like that, and the stresses involved?
Well, you can look at my grey hair and see the stresses involved. I mean, yeah, on reflection, a very stressful career path to choose, which is probably why I kept going with other things at the same time. But yeah, one of the most rewarding that we've probably done, the years of Bestival that we did, which I think again was about 12 or maybe 14 years of that. But to have the first one, we had, I think, Basement Jaxx, Fatboy Slim, Milo, Goggle Bordello, things like that. So all these acts that were just breaking through, and we were, I think probably I have to give credit slightly to my music curation in terms of like I sort of knew who was just about to be big, or I was friends with, someone who I could knew that I could get someone big. So we were off to quite a good start with that. And then with Josie's kind of whole creative look, everything was hand painted, things were sourced from India and Thailand, and there were things that were, all the signs were hand painted, things that nowadays, if you go around Wilderness, Latitude, these festivals, everyone's doing it. But we were kind of setting the scene with that, and we were kind of like the first boutique festival alongside the Big Chill, that was sort of, it was much more of a sort of intimate atmosphere. It wasn't just a bar and a main stage. We launched the whole sort of dressing up / fancy dress thing and boutique camping that Josie brought. So you could stay in a teepee or a yurt, which was very unusual. Normally you'd just be crashing on the floor or sleeping in the sleeping bag with your mates. But we definitely picked everything up, shook it all up in the festival world. And then to go from we had everyone from Stevie Wonder and Elton John to Massive Attack to Brian Eno to Amy Winehouse, had a massive run of hip hop royalty with Outkast, Beastie Boys, Public Enemy, Wu-Tang Clan, Missy Elliott. Some of the best hip hop acts I've ever seen. When people always thought that hip hop acts would be a bit duff and a bit just like a tape playing and then performing, but all of those acts, all of those hip hop acts, Snoop Dogg, just totally incredible. So yeah, too many amazing headliners. But really, the magic of Bestival for me and Josie and everyone that came was the atmosphere. You could have probably stripped away all the bands and just removed the stages and just that crowd in there. The amount of creativity and fun and escapism, and I think that was always our thing. It's if you look at something like Boomtown now, the escapism there is what 18-year-olds want. They want to go there. They want to forget about their lives, their jobs, their the real world, and just be like, I am in this other world. And that was what Bestival was as well.
Yeah, festivals kind of became more of the festival experience, I think, didn't they? Sort of through those years.
Yeah. I mean, like I say, before that it was let's go and see this band on a stage at Reading, and Reading is amazing. I love Reading, and it does what it does, which is put on the best bands in the world on a massive stage to a huge audience. But we were interested in something much more sort of immersive and slightly counterculture, and something that people could share and feel part of. And we always felt that the Bestival family kind of owned Bestival as much as we did. Sadly, they didn't own it when it came to the debt and the troubles and the stresses of running it, which probably almost outnumbered, not outnumbered, but outweighed the sort of the highs. So without going into detail, it was definitely a big baptism of fire getting into that. And once you start a festival as an independent promoter, and I take my hat off to all the independent festival promoters out there, you're sort of on this wheel that you can't get off, because you've run up all that sort of debt putting it on, then you need to sell tickets for the next year, and then you if you don't quite get there one year, you're like, oh well, that's all right, we'll just make that back the next year, and then you don't quite make it back, and then it's like, so however successful some of those festivals are, they're constantly in that sort of cycle of sort of trying to pay the bills, but yeah, no regrets.
I have sometimes people pleaser tendencies where I'll go and do certain things based on this thing in my head about letting people down. Obviously nothing is with the magnitude of putting on a festival. Was there ever a point where you kind of got to a point where you thought, I kind of want to get out of this, but I don't want to disappoint all these people?
That's a good question. I think I'd probably share the people pleasing thing for sure, but it was partially that, but it was also basically the point came where festivals like Boomtown and even Parklife, I'm thinking, or suddenly we weren't the only new kid on the block. There were other festivals out there. Everyone was starting to. I think it was the point where some of the other ones started to get sort of Kanye and some big hip hop things in, and we'd just come off the back of Stevie Wonder and Elton John, and some we were up to 60,000 capacity. We'd started at 4,000. We were absolutely flying, and then we probably hit that peak, and we probably should have capped it, maybe at 35, 40,000. And we probably grew very fast, and then the competition increased. We weren't the latest. We weren't the trendiest festival in the world anymore. But yeah, not in any sad way. But we just it just got to that point where we lost a little bit of the sparkle. And it wasn't so much about letting people down or the crowd down. It was more about the financial stuff. That you have to keep. You've got a lot of staff. You have to keep that going. So it was more driven by that. But the golden lining was that the silver lining, sorry, was that we started Camp Bestival as well 4 years after Bestival, and that was always seen as the little baby festival, the family angled festival that we'd started. But luckily, that from the word go was a sort of financial and cultural success, and it still is. And so that's what me and Josie are doing alongside all our other things now, is still running Camp Bestival. So we're still flying that Bestival flag. It's not quite as rock and roll as back in the 2000s, but it's definitely as rewarding. If not more so, because everyone goes to bed by 1 a.m. We can actually get some sleep, and we don't have to worry about so many aspects of it. But yeah, it's a different kettle of fish for sure.
And I think as people who enjoy festivals and things get older, it's nice that they've got these places that cater to that. The next thing I wanted to ask you about was Earworm with the music supervision, because I think probably for a lot of DJs, it's like a dream job, isn't it? You kind of being a selector in a very different circumstance. Like, how's that been? And kind of how big an operation is that?
Yeah, so I mean that doesn't exist as such anymore. But it was a great sort of other string to the bow for a little while. yeah, I think probably being seen as at least back then as a tastemaker and having the sort of musical knowledge without blowing my own trumpet, but obviously through just being on the radio, I'd listen to every single thing that was coming out. I think it's technically impossible now in the times of Spotify to have that knowledge, but there was a time when I'd probably know every single electronic record or most of them that was coming out. I'd know a lot of other styles and genres as well. And so, yeah, you build up this musical brain, and I think an obvious way to use that was music supervision. So set that up with a couple of friends. We did some really big projects like Big Little Lies and some films with Andrea Arnold and stuff, some BBC stuff, and then it kind of took a different path. But yeah, I sort of got, I think I'm definitely, and Josie would say this, I'm probably guilty of trying to wear too many hats sometimes, and I don't get bored of things, but I just like flitting from one thing to the next, and not always necessarily leaving something, but I love the fact that we're running a sauna and contrast therapy business. I also like the fact that I can go and DJ in Ibiza in the summer. I like the fact that I've got a record label that I can sort of do the A&R for, and I like the fact that I can go and teach a group of people to meditate. So it's I do find that that's sort of nourishing for myself in terms of having a few different things to do. But yeah, like things like music supervision, they, unless they're flying, then it's quite hard work, because you sign up for something like a film, and then it takes about 2 years to make. The money that they say at the beginning that is going to pay you for 6 months, you end up working on it for 2 years, and then you're like, wow, that was a hell of a lot of work for no credit on the film.
Yeah, and I think there's it's the good and the bad of liking lots of different things. Like, I wish there was more time in the day I'd spend more time on the decks, I'd spend more time trying to make music, because there's all these things I enjoy, there's just not the time to do them.
Yes, I share that feeling. We need at least 2 or 3 lives to enjoy that.
Yeah, and the challenge that you have as well when you're doing a lot of different things is the time involved in marketing any one of them. So, like, you might spend the time doing all the different things, but keeping all those brands active and relevant is a real time suck, I think.
Yeah, and that's definitely one of my failings. If I don't really look at it as failings, but I'm possibly more interested in the project at the time and less worried about how many Instagram likes we've got or the financial aspects of it as well. So I'm quite bad at I very much live in the moment, and I like creating things and being creative, but I don't always think it through in terms of like, how are we going to sort of monetize this, or so. Yeah, very much not driven by that. But I think that's good for me. I enjoy sort of being creative without necessarily worrying about the financial side of it.
Yeah, you can get bogged down, I think, especially with creativity. It's like when if you want to make music now, it's kind of, do you want to make music because you enjoy making music, or do you want to make music because you want some numbers to quantify whether you're good at the thing? It's super difficult. The next thing I wanted to discuss was your experience of lockdown. I've been through discussed it with quite a few people on here, but I think you were very involved in sort of doing things for the community, weren't you, in terms of the mixes and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, lockdown, God, it was only a few years ago, but it just seems like a complete lifetime ago. Selfishly, I really loved lockdown, and I don't mean that. I'm very aware of what hardships and and obviously much worse that people experienced and lost people and loved ones and stuff. So I don't mean that in any glib way, but just selfishly, being on the Isle of Wight, it was a baking hot summer for part of it. I didn't have to worry about a lot of the day-to-day work stuff. We didn't really have the money to, it's not like we were just rolling around in cash, loving life. We had to take loans like everyone else, but it was more about just the freedom to actually hang out with the kids and sort of not have to do the daily grind for a while. So, but yeah, I suppose musically, and we wanted to keep our audiences, and I don't mean, but the festival audience and my radio kind of audience. So yeah, I was on Worldwide FM during that time with Giles Peterson. Thanks to Giles. I was doing Drum and Breakfast, which was like my sort of little drum and bass at breakfast time sort of turn, which, get dressed up in a daft outfit and play an hour and a half of drum and bass on a stream. Doesn't sound very appetizing, but seemed to do something for just, I think it just kept people's spirits up, because I was very aware that, if you were stuck in a high rise in wherever, or not in a fortunate position, then you needed some glimmers of light. So I think it was partially for our own sanity, and partially to try and help keep people sane.
Amazing. And let's get on to wellness now, because this is a kind of huge area, isn't it? There's sound baths, there's meditations, and there's the floating sauna as well, isn't there? So really interested in what your journey into wellness was, and that experience, how you've kind of learned and developed things like meditation journeys and sound baths and things like that. If you could share something around that.
Yeah. I mean, me and Josie, we learned to meditate together when we were about in our early 20s. So we've been sort of in that world for a long time. We've practiced yoga also since our early 20s. So we've always had that in a parallel life alongside the sort of raving, more hedonistic activity. And it's always been a cornerstone of what we kind of do. We've always had some sort of well-being angle at our festivals. And then, probably more recently, 5 years ago, I learned to be a meditation teacher. Josie learned to be a yoga teacher. So just to kind of cement some of that learning that we had, and to, get it out to other people, which is probably what me and Josie do best, is, giving other people great things and happy, amazing, creative things to get hold of. So, and then fast forwarding, we had a thing called slow motion, which turned into slow mo, which is now our sort of contrast therapy angle, which is saunas and ice baths, but done in a really cool, Josie designed, very beautiful, aesthetically pleasing, amazing spaces to go into, forget the world for a little while, a la Boomtown, a la Bestival, kind of, but in a more healthy environment, maybe, where you're doing good for your body and your mind, as well as chatting to strangers and people that you might not normally sit down next to in a pair of Speedos. And our little tagline is next generation contrast therapy. So it's about taking contrast therapy, i.e. hot and cold, and which is really good for your mind and body, and taking that to a younger generation, also our generation, but a younger generation as well. And our aim is very much to take that to the high street and to be a sort of a national / global player in that sort of field of saunas, ice baths, but with spin-offs of meditation, yoga, and music plays a big part in that, which sort of goes full circle round to Sunday Best and chill out and ambient music and all of that stuff. So it all kind of ties in.
So how does the hot and the cold work physically? What's the kind of benefit? Is it muscular, or is it your heart, or like?
Yeah, I mean both of those things. Also, neurologically, it's amazing. It's there's a lot of science coming out about Alzheimer's and other syndromes and diseases that can be alleviated or at least helped through it. So I'm not at all saying it's going to cure things, but even on the base level, it makes you feel really good. So it has a lot of physical and mental health benefits in terms of making you feel good. But then if you go deeper into the science, there's a lot of cardiovascular system, reducing risk of stroke, blood pressure, the mental health stuff that I was talking about. So, but I think most people, that the sort of tagline that's been going around about sauna is the new pub or whatever. It's the new pub, it's the new club. It's you can still go out and go raving if you're in your 50s, and you can still drink wine and have fun. But then, if you're going to a sauna a couple of times a week, then you're probably doing yourself some good at the same time as doing that. So I honestly feel that the sort of sauna culture in the UK will be as big as yoga, if not bigger. I think there will be saunas on every high street, and not this sort of crappy plastic gym saunas that we have had. Like beautiful handmade wooden saunas that are just escapes for people to kind of escape from regular life and go and refresh and revitalize, and then come back out feeling better.
So this might be a bit of a starter pack question, but because the gym I go to's got a sauna, and I'll sit in it a bit sometimes, but I don't mindfully go to have the proper sauna experience. So how should you use a sauna, if that's not too daft a question?
No, it's not a daft question at all. And to be totally honest, until a year and a half ago, I didn't actually know how to use a sauna. And then a friend of ours said, if you buy a sauna at the same time as me, then we'll get a good discount. And we didn't really have the money for it, but we sort of got it together and wondered what we were doing, and then just saw that we thought that we'd set one up on the Isle of Wight, because we could see that there was this huge sauna explosion happening around the UK with mobile saunas. So we took the plunge and bought one, and then quickly learnt how to sauna. And in a nutshell, you get in there, you sit in there until you start to feel like you want to get out, and that you just follow your instinct. That might be 5 minutes, might be 10 minutes. I'd say a maximum of 12 to 15 minutes. You naturally just want to get into the cold. You then get out, and that's either if you're lucky enough to have like a ice plunge or a cold plunge, you get into the cold plunge, which instantly kind of cools you down, obviously, or you might be getting into a lake or the river or the sea, or you might just be standing outside in the fresh air. And then you do that for a few minutes, then you go back into the sauna, because you're naturally cooled down and you're feeling like, I want to get back in the heat. And so it's this sort of cycle, and you do that for 2 or 3 rounds. So it's kind of rounding through that. And after 45 minutes of that, then you're kind of done, and you feel like you've just been unwrapped. You feel fresh. You feel like invigorated. You've sweated out the toxins. You've kind of forgotten about what you were worrying about before you got in there, and it's it's kind of 2 or 3 rounds of that. I mean, the science behind it is really fascinating, but I think just on a base level, that's what you want to kind of be doing, and not to denigrate what health clubs have done or municipal swimming pools, but sitting in the small plastic sweaty seats and then getting into a tepid sort of swimming pool, it doesn't really have that contrast therapy. So it needs to be a hot sauna. It doesn't need to be blisteringly hot or uncomfortably hot, but it needs to be probably 80 degrees, and then the water needs to be cold, like ideally under 15 degrees. So that's where the magic happens, and the body makes you acclimatise to the extremes, and that's where the magic of this sort of contrast therapy thing happens. So and the great thing is, it doesn't need to be expensive. It's on most coastal beaches now. Most of us run year round, so it's just as good in the summer as it is in the winter. So most people can access it, and for between like a tenner and 20 quid, you know, which I know is still a lot of money to some people, but it's you know, it's doable for most people. So it doesn't have to be a massively expensive kind of pastime.
Yeah, and I think with that, the way like a health club sauna is often kind of perceived, it's like, right, I'll go have my workout, I'll have a quick sauna at the end. It's very different to kind of thinking about it as I'm going to have a sauna experience, and that's your thing, not it's a bit of my gym session. So it's kind of getting that mindset, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not really a gym bunny, as you can see, but but I think people that use it as part of their gym thing is brilliant. But also all the people that have never really been in the sauna, they're like, oh, what are you doing on Saturday? Well, I'm going down to Slow-Mo with Adam and Robbie, and we're gonna, you know, have a 2-hour session. We're gonna have a chat about shit. We're gonna just shoot the breeze. We're gonna get in some ice, which we'd never thought we'd be able to do. We're gonna sit in some temperatures which we normally would find really uncomfortable, but we're actually gonna love it. And we're gonna just sit around, have some tea afterwards, and it's gonna be a really healthy way to spend 2 hours.
Sounds good. I'm there. So. Is there anything else that you've got coming up that we've not covered?
Crikey, is that not enough for you? No. Well, I mean, yeah, you know, on the Slow-Mo contrast therapy thing, we're just about to launch in King's Cross next week, so that's our biggest kind of pop up yet. We've got a few high street locations under review to sort of further kind of cement that. We've got we're launching the Camp Bestival lineup at the end of the month, so that's really exciting. We've already announced Basement Jacks for that, so that's off to a really good start for this year. I'm teaching meditation most months, and yeah, we're just doing our usual thing, and we got 4 kids and 4 pygmy goats to look after as well.
Nice, keeping very busy then. That's amazing, Rob. Thanks for sharing your story with me. I've really enjoyed that conversation.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I have to admit, I was slightly sort of unsure whether it would work for the long form that you're doing, because I always thought podcasts were good at 20 minutes, but it's been really enjoyable. So thank you for the break.
Brilliant. I appreciate that. Right, I'll let you get back on with your day. Thanks ever so much for your time today.
Cheers.
Take care. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Once a DJ. If you'd like to support the show, then head to onceadj.com/support to find out how you can help. If you'd like to get in touch with any feedback or suggestions, email onceadjpodcast@gmail.com. Once a DJ is produced by the good people at Remote Control. If you'd like to find out more about working with them, head to remote-ctrl.co.uk.